Epsilon 9 wasn't supposed to be a place of hope. Not for the humans, not for anyone. A barren world on the edge of explored space, it was wrapped in constant storms, hostile wildlife, and a lack of any significant resources. The atmosphere was too thick, the gravity slightly off, and the temperature fluctuated wildly, making it impossible for even the most advanced machinery to function for long. The Galactic Council had marked it off as a hopeless dead-end planet, just another of many experiments doomed to fail. When the first human colony ship arrived, its reception wasn't exactly warm. Among the high towers of alien civilizations, where the sleek, advanced species thrived, the news of humanity's plan was met with ridicule. The Vrel, with their translucent skin and telepathic abilities, laughed at the idea of such a primitive species trying to tame a world like Epsilon 9. The Eldar, ancient and wise, rolled their eyes at the human audacity to even think about establishing a colony in such a hostile place. "You'll last a year at most," one of the Eldar ambassadors had said during a council meeting, the words dripping with disdain. "It's the perfect world to test the resilience of your species, I suppose. Though I doubt your resilience is enough to overcome the very elements of the planet." Humans, however, had never been good at listening to others' doubts. Area Fletcher, a captain in the colonial fleet and one of the colony's first settlers, stood tall before the assembly, her face unyielding despite the murmurs around her. She didn't care what the galaxy thought. For her, the plan wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about something more personal, more deeply ingrained in the human spirit: survival. "We've been to the edges of space before," Aria had said, her voice steady. "We've fought against insurmountable odds, built cities on hostile worlds, and survived the impossible. Epsilon 9 won't break us. It will become a beacon for humanity's potential." Her words, however, were met with more mockery than admiration. The other races didn't believe it. They couldn't. They saw humans as reckless, impulsive, and naive. The idea that a group of humans would be able to carve out a civilization on such a treacherous world was laughable, even to their closest allies. And so, the settlement began, under the unrelenting eyes of a galaxy that waited for the humans to fail. The colony, made up of families, engineers, scientists, and soldiers, built a rudimentary base near the planet's equator. It was hard work, harder than anything they'd ever faced before. The storm clouds above them were a constant menace, and the ground was rocky and unforgiving. Yet, day by day, they pressed forward. The settlers had one thing the galaxy didn't expect: sheer, stubborn determination. Captain Fletcher was at the forefront of the effort. She watched the horizon as a storm began to gather, the familiar low rumble of thunder sending a shiver through the air. The colony was still young, its foundations fragile, but she knew they had only one choice: fight or perish. She'd seen this before on Earth, her home planet, where every generation had fought against seemingly insurmountable odds. From the trenches of their wars to the darkest days of their history, humanity had always found a way to persevere. "Aria, we've lost the communications relay again," came the voice of Lieutenant Dane from behind her, his tone tired but resolute. He was standing beside the damaged generator that powered their outpost. The system was barely functioning, and the storm was causing surges of power. If the communications array went down, they would be cut off from the rest of the galaxy. There would be no help. "It's fine," she said, her voice steady. "We've dealt with worse before. We just need to keep pushing forward. This storm won't break us." Her words were more for herself than for Dane. Aria had always known that being human meant not just surviving the storms, but learning to thrive in them. They didn't have the technological advantages of the Vrel or the ancient knowledge of the Eldar. But they had something else: a relentless will to survive. As she watched the wind pick up, sending debris flying through the air, she felt something deep within her stir. It wasn't fear. It was defiance. The rest of the settlers worked tirelessly, reinforcing structures, securing equipment, and ensuring their supply lines didn't collapse under the strain. Their faces were grim, but there was a quiet pride in their eyes. They knew what was at stake. They weren't just building a colony, they were building a future. And every hammer strike, every blueprint drafted, was a message to the galaxy. Humanity wouldn't just survive on Epsilon 9. They would make it their home. By the time the storm hit its peak, the settlers were ready. Arya stood at the top of a nearby ridge, gazing out over the horizon, where the first flashes of lightning lit up the sky. There was no turning back now. The storm raged with fury, but the colony, despite its fragility, stood strong. Epsilon 9 would not break them. Not today. And while the galaxy watched with skepticism and scorn, humanity had begun to carve its mark on the universe. The laughable colony was just getting started. The storm had passed. Epsilon 9's skies cleared, and the survivors of the storm worked with renewed determination to rebuild what the chaos had torn asunder. The colony was battered, but not broken. The wind had torn through their tents and scattered supplies, but the settlers were resourceful. They repaired their structures, repurposed the wreckage, and held on to hope. The work never stopped. There was no time for despair. The rest of the galaxy might be watching, but the humans knew they had only themselves to rely on. As days turned into weeks, it seemed as though the worst of their troubles had passed. The colony began to stabilize. New crops, genetically engineered to withstand the volatile weather, began to sprout. The settlers managed to build stronger shelters, fortified against the planet's unpredictable temper. The communications relay, after countless failed repairs, finally hummed to life again. The humans were starting to get back on their feet. But just as the colony was beginning to catch its breath, a dark shadow fell across them. It started as a flicker on their long-range sensors, an anomaly at the edge of their system. At first, it seemed like a glitch, a minor malfunction in their still primitive technology. But as the hours passed, the signals grew clearer, and then terrifyingly more definite. Something was coming. Something massive. Captain Fletcher stood in the colony's command center, her eyes locked on the incoming data. The alert was unmistakable. An entire fleet was moving toward them, its trajectory aimed directly at Epsilon 9. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. "The Krillnar," said Lieutenant Dane, his voice tight. The insectoid race had been known for their ruthless conquests, a species of terrifying warriors who traveled the galaxy like a locust swarm, devouring all in their path. Their ships, sleek and menacing, would not stop until their goal was achieved. Epsilon 9, a newly established human colony on the edge of space, was nothing more than another prize in their expansion. To them, it would be an easy target, just another insignificant world to add to their ever-growing empire. Fletcher swallowed her rising dread. There was no mistaking the Krillnar fleet. From their radar readings, she could already tell that the numbers were overwhelming. They had no hope of matching the sheer firepower the Krillnar could bring. Their weapons were primitive compared to the Krillnar's vast arsenal, and their fleet barely consisted of a few dozen ships, many of them hastily constructed from salvaged parts. A quiet tension gripped the command center. It was the kind of silence that filled a room just before the storm of battle broke. "We'll never hold them off," murmured Lieutenant Tessa, one of the colony's lead engineers. She was a realist, the kind of person who usually dealt with the mechanical aspects of the colony's technology. But even she knew that no amount of engineering could overcome the Krillnar's firepower. "We're not going to hold them off," Fletcher said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "We're going to make them regret ever thinking they could take us." The words hung in the air, heavy with the gravity of their implications. To many, it would sound like the bravado of a desperate leader. But Fletcher had seen this before. The human will to survive had always been a formidable weapon. And now, with her back against the wall, it would be the only weapon she had. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. There was no time to prepare in any traditional sense. Their fleet was small, their weapons barely adequate, and their training had been minimal. But Fletcher knew that what they lacked in firepower, they could make up for with strategy, agility, and ingenuity. She gathered the colony's best minds, engineers, military tacticians, and even some of the settlers who had once been part of Earth's special forces, to come up with a plan. "We won't try to match them head-on," Fletcher said as they huddled in the command center. "We're going to hit them where it hurts. We'll use the terrain. This planet's atmosphere is a mess, and the storm systems can wreak havoc on their technology. We're going to lure them into a trap." At first, her plan seemed absurd. The Krillnar ships were built for war, fast, powerful, and nearly indestructible. The idea that the humans could pull off any sort of ambush, let alone defeat them, seemed laughable. But Fletcher's confidence was contagious. As the days passed, the settlers worked tirelessly, building makeshift defenses and repairing any ships they could salvage. They'd rig the storm's electrical currents to overload their own defenses, creating sudden bursts of power to confuse the Krillnar ships' targeting systems. The humans didn't have the numbers, but they had something far more dangerous: an unshakable determination to protect what they'd worked for. When the Krillnar fleet arrived, they did not find a colony on the brink of collapse. They found a united force, one willing to fight with everything it had. The humans weren't fighting for territory. They weren't fighting for riches or glory. They were fighting for survival. The battle that ensued was nothing short of miraculous. The Krillnar, used to conquering without resistance, were thrown off balance by the humans' unpredictability. The storm systems wreaked havoc on their targeting systems, and the humans' guerrilla tactics, attacking from hidden positions and using their environment to their advantage, caused confusion in the Krillnar ranks. It was brutal, messy, and far from perfect. But it was enough. When the last Krillnar ship finally retreated, limping back into the depths of space, it left behind a stunned silence. The humans had won. Against all odds, they had done the impossible. And the galaxy, still watching from afar, was forced to reconsider their assessment of humanity. News of the Krillnar defeat at Epsilon 9 spread across the galaxy like wildfire. At first, many refused to believe it. The Krillnar weren't just feared. They were a force of nature, the destroyers of civilizations, a plague of precision and power. No species had ever withstood a full assault by one of their fleets and lived to tell the tale. And yet, humanity had done exactly that. The galaxy scrambled for answers. How had a backwater colony, barely a few years into its development, repelled an invasion force of that magnitude? Analysts speculated wildly. Council members demanded reports. Military strategists across the stars pored over intercepted transmissions, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. The truth was even more unsettling than the rumors. The humans hadn't just survived. They had turned the planet itself into a weapon. The storms of Epsilon 9, once seen as a death sentence, had become an unlikely ally. With homegrown EMP bursts, atmospheric traps, and ground-based guerrilla warfare, the settlers had used every inch of their hostile environment against the invaders. They had shown creativity where other races had shown caution. They had taken risks no other military would dare consider. And it had worked. On Epsilon 9, the aftermath of the battle was grim but triumphant. Craters from downed Krillnar ships dotted the horizon. Twisted metal smoldered in the dirt, and the thick air still carried the acrid scent of plasma burns. But amid the ruins, the colony stood tall. The people walked with sore muscles, bruises, and bandaged limbs, but also with pride. They had earned this ground with blood and fire. Captain Area Fletcher didn't rest. There was no time for celebration. She moved among the wounded, checking systems, leading repair teams, and sending encrypted updates back to Earth. The Galactic Council had not yet officially acknowledged their victory. No support had been offered, no aid sent. But Area wasn't waiting. Instead, she began forging something new. Using salvaged Krillnar tech, her engineers began reverse engineering alien systems. Their damaged ships were upgraded with Krillnar shielding and propulsion units. Weapons once considered crude were refitted with alien plasma cores. A new fleet began to take shape, not massive in number, but deadly in function. Meanwhile, alien delegations began arriving, quietly, cautiously. The Corps were first, a reptilian warrior race known for mercenary work. They had little interest in politics or diplomacy, but they respected strength. A Corps strike lord named Vectol landed with a small retinue and asked only one question: "What do you need?" "We need partners," Fletcher replied without hesitation. "You fight. We design. Together, we build something stronger." The Corps agreed, and just like that, humanity had its first ally. More envoys came the following weeks. Not all were friendly. Some came to measure the colony's defenses, thinking perhaps they could take what the Krillnar had failed to claim. They left humbled, or didn't leave at all. Others arrived with proposals, offers of trade, technology exchanges, and quiet, whispered questions about how humans had done what no one else could. Back in the central dome of Epsilon 9, now repaired and humming with new energy, Area stood over a holographic map of the sector. A small flickering beacon marked their colony, but surrounding it were other unclaimed worlds, opportunities. She turned to her team, eyes alight with purpose. "We're not just going to hold Epsilon 9, she said. "We're going to build, expand. Let the galaxy see that what they mocked has become the foundation of something greater." They were no longer the laughingstock of the galaxy. They were the ones rewriting the rules. And while old empires clung to their legacies and traditions, humanity was forging a new path forward, relentless, unpredictable, and unshackably determined. The tide had turned, and for the first time, the galaxy began to fear just how far humans could rise. The humans' victory over the Krillnar had changed the tone of interstellar politics, but not everyone was pleased. Far beyond Epsilon 9, nestled in the cold spiral arms of the galaxy, the Xerix Empire watched events unfold with growing contempt. The Xerix had ruled their region of space for centuries with meticulous cruelty. Insectile and calculating, they prided themselves on order and control, viewing other civilizations as variables in their equations of dominance. Humanity, in their eyes, was a statistical anomaly, too chaotic to be predicted, too stubborn to be ignored. Worse still, their defeat of the Krillnar disrupted a balance the Xerix had profited from for decades. So they made their move. The first attack came without warning. A human convoy en route to a new mining site on the planet Veta 3 vanished mid-jump. No distress calls. No survivors. Then came coordinated strikes on outposts near the fringes of human expansion. Small colonies, research stations, supply routes, all hit in quick succession with brutal efficiency. At Epsilon 9, Area Fletcher read the reports with clenched fists. The Xerix weren't here for conquest. They were here to sabotage. This was a message. Stay small. Stay contained. Or be erased. Fletcher refused to stay small. But this time, she knew grit wouldn't be enough. The Xerix were not like the Krillnar. They didn't charge headfirst into battle. They infiltrated, subverted, dismantled from within. A war against them would be slow, calculated, and full of traps. And so, Area made a choice no one expected. She reached out to the Corps. The reptilian mercenaries had fought alongside the humans during the Krillnar assault, but their alliance was transactional, limited. The Corps respected strength, but they didn't pledge loyalty, not unless it benefited them. This time, Fletcher didn't offer promises. She offered territory. 3 systems in the Vala sector, she told Vectol, the Corps strike lord, across a dimly lit strategy table in the colony's war room. Full settlement rights. Mining, farming, infrastructure, yours. In exchange, I want your fleets, your ground soldiers, and your engineers. Vectol was silent for a long moment, his reptilian eyes gleaming in the low light. You offer a bold bargain, human. Fletcher didn't blink. I'm done reacting to enemies. It's time we go on the offensive. The deal was struck. Over the next few months, Epsilon 9 became a hive of furious activity. Core warships, hulking beasts of metal and plasma, joined human vessels in orbital dockyards. Engineers from both species collaborated, blending human creativity with core brute force design. The resulting fleet was unlike anything in the galaxy. Fast, unpredictable, and vicious. The first strike against the Xerix came 6 weeks later. Operation Burnt Hive targeted a hidden Xerix weapons facility buried deep in an asteroid field. Using stealth drones and timed meteorite disruptions, the Joint Fleet disabled the outpost's defenses in under 12 minutes. The human core strike team landed, secured the facility, and planted demolition cores before vanishing into the void. The Xerix were caught off guard. They weren't used to being outmaneuvered, and certainly not by humans. But retaliation followed quickly. Epsilon 9 suffered coordinated cyber attacks. A viral algorithm infiltrated their AI systems, scrambling communications and auto-targeting protocols. For 36 hours, the colony was blind, nearly deaf, and vulnerable. And yet they didn't fall. Fletcher had prepared for this too. Her engineers had built redundancies, analog backups, and manual overrides. The systems were back online within 2 days, stronger, smarter, and more resilient. In the center of Epsilon 9, a statue was erected, not of a hero or soldier, but of a broken chain, a symbol of what humanity had refused to become: controlled. The Xerix had underestimated them. Again. They would not make that mistake a third time. Because now, humanity wasn't just surviving. They were striking back, with allies, with technology, and with the cold, calculated precision of a species that had learned the game and was rewriting the rules. The Xerix didn't take defeat lightly. After the destruction of their weapons facility, they retaliated with something far more insidious than fleets or sabotage. They turned to diplomacy. A Xerix ambassador, tall and shimmering with iridescent carapace, arrived at Epsilon 9 under the pretense of peace. His name was Ricolin, and though he bowed low upon arrival, everyone knew his words would be knives wrapped in silk. Captain Fletcher stood across from him in the newly constructed Hall of Accord, Epsilon 9's first true diplomatic chamber, its walls lined with banners of every allied species who now walked the colony's soil. Core warriors flanked the doors, their expressions unreadable. Human diplomats watched from the balcony. Suspicion hung thick in the air. Vrikolin offered the usual platitudes: proposals for ceasefires, shared trade routes, limited technology exchanges. He spoke of cooperation, of galactic stability, of how war benefits no one. Aria didn't even flinch. "We've read your peace offers before," she said coolly. "They come with knives in the back." The ambassador spread his arms in mock offense. "Come now, Captain. You've proven humanity is more than we expected. You've earned a seat at the table." "We'll build our own table," she replied. "And we'll decide who sits at it." The Xerix left with polite smiles and concealed venom. Fletcher had no illusions. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a distraction. The real threat was already in motion. 2 weeks later, a human governor on the mining world of Feldspar Prime was assassinated. The station's AI core was fried from within. Evidence pointed not to the Xerix, but to humans. The implications were explosive. Accusations flew, trust frayed, and the newly formed coalition began to wobble under the strain. That was the Xerix strategy. Not open war, but internal collapse. Fletcher responded with fire. She called an emergency summit on Epsilon 9, summoning the heads of the human sectors, core warlords and other rising allies, the feline Nimari, the crystalline Lothari, even a rogue Eldar scholar who had defected from their ancient enclaves. The Hall of Accord had never been so tense, nor so full of species who, months earlier, wouldn't have deigned to breathe the same air. "Look around you," Aria said, standing at the center of the chamber. "This is what they fear, not our weapons, not our ships. This, unity, cooperation, innovation. We're everything they're not, and they will do anything to break that." She let the silence hang before continuing. But we won't break. We don't shatter. We adapt. She unveiled Project Chainfire, an interspecies intelligence network, rapid response defense fleets, and shared AI protocols designed to detect and eliminate subversion tactics. Each allied species contributed unique strengths: core scouts, Nimeri data weavers, Lothari technomancers. Together, it became the most adaptive, unpredictable intelligence system in the sector. Within weeks, it bore fruit. Zhirik's sleeper agents, disguised as human settlers, were identified and neutralized across 4 colonies. Hacked AIs were restored and hardened. Even Earth's once cautious leadership, watching from afar, began routing reinforcements and resources to Epsilon 9. And then came the breaking point. A hidden Zhirik's command station, a remote fortress known as the Throne Shard, was uncovered on a dying moon. It wasn't just a strategic hub. It was where the Zhirik's had been coordinating every covert operation against humanity and its allies. Fletcher didn't hesitate. The assault was brutal and surgical. Human and core fleets punched a hole through the Shard's defenses, while Lothari infiltrators disabled its command systems from within. When the final explosion bloomed across the lunar horizon, the signal was clear. The throne had shattered, and with it, the illusion of Zhirik's dominance. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy looked at a new possibility, one not ruled by ancient powers, but built by something unexpected, something unstoppable. Humanity hadn't just survived. They were becoming the center of the future. The destruction of the Throne Shard sent ripples through the galaxy, political, cultural, and military. The Zhirik's empire, once thought unassailable, had suffered a mortal wound. Their covert networks were exposed, their aura of invincibility shattered. In the quiet after the blast, there was only one name on every envoy's lips, one world drawing every eye: Epsilon 9. What had begun as a colony laughed at by the galaxy was now becoming the axis of a new order. Trade routes were being rerouted toward it. Refugees from border worlds, fleeing Zhirik's retaliation or Krulnar raids, arrived daily, carrying stories, skills, and the spark of rebellion. The colony was bursting at its seams, growing faster than anyone could have imagined. It needed a government. Fletcher stood atop a raised platform in what had once been the colony's landing pad and now served as the beating heart of its reconstruction. Her uniform was streaked with dust, her voice amplified across the courtyard to thousands of gathered settlers, allies, and dignitaries. "We built this world on our own," she declared, her voice steady. "When others mocked, we worked. When they attacked, we fought. When they tried to divide us, we became stronger." She paused, letting the wind catch her words. "But we're no longer just a colony. We're not a fringe outpost. We're the spark of something greater. Today we raise a new banner, not just for humanity, but for every being who chooses hope over fear, unity over submission." A massive flag unfurled behind her, a new symbol, stitched from the colors of Earth, Kor, Lothari, Nimari, and other allies. At its center, a fractured ring mended with iron and flame. Beneath it, 2 words etched in 5 languages: Unity Forge. The crowd roared. It wasn't just symbolic. The newly formed Epsilon Compact was real, an interspecies alliance with Epsilon 9 as its capital. A provisional council was established. Fletcher was named High Marshal, responsible for defense and diplomacy, while an elected assembly of settlers and species would handle governance. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't smooth. But it was new. And in a galaxy ruled for millennia by tradition and stagnation, new was revolutionary. The Compact's rise, however, didn't go unnoticed. The Eldar, ancient rulers of the core sectors, convened in secret, disturbed by the speed of the humans' ascent. They had once dismissed Earth's children as short-lived and rash. Now they watched a species building alliances across cultures, innovating at breakneck speed, and toppling empires without hesitation. They dispatched an envoy, Ilarion, a silver-eyed diplomat who had spoken to Area Fletcher once, back when the Council had scoffed at her colony's chances. He arrived at Epsilon 9 to find a bustling capital being built atop steel and ash. Towers crafted from human alloys and Lutheri crystal pierced the skyline. Multi-species marketplaces hummed with life. Combat exercises blended core tactics with Earth's guerrilla methods. What had once been dust and storms now beat like the heart of a living empire. Ilarion met Fletcher in a glass-paneled atrium overlooking the new Senate spire. "You've risen quickly," he said with a smooth, unreadable tone. "Too quickly, some would say." Fletcher didn't look away from the city. "We don't have your centuries, so we move fast. Adapt faster." Ilarion's eyes narrowed. "And if that speed becomes dangerous? If others see you as a threat to the balance?" She finally turned to face him. "The balance was built to keep the powerful in power. We're not a threat to peace. We're a threat to complacency." There was no threat in her tone, just certainty. Ilarion left with no promises, no alliances, but with the distinct impression that the galaxy's axis had shifted, and somewhere, in the deepest reaches of unclaimed space, others began to stir. Not enemies, not yet, but ancient powers who had watched empires rise and fall were beginning to whisper a question none had dared ask before. What if the future doesn't belong to the old? What if it belongs to them? To the humans? To Epsilon 9? The Epsilon Compact was no longer a secret. The Galactic Core knew its name. The border worlds whispered it like a rallying cry. Even the old empires, crumbling in the twilight of their stagnation, had begun to study it with wary eyes. But there were places beyond the reach of diplomacy, beyond the light of star maps, where older, darker forces waited. The Rim, a lawless expanse of dead stars, broken planets, and ancient ruins, where even the Krillnar dared not tread for long. It was here, in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, that the next challenge stirred. It began with silence. 5 colonies, spread across distant systems aligned with the Compact, went dark within days. No distress signals, no signs of struggle, just silence, the kind that screams something's deeply, horribly wrong. Fletcher stood in the war room beneath the Senate spire. Her council gathered. Vectol of the Core, crystal-eyed Lutheri emissaries, silent Nemeri shadow weavers. Maps flickered overhead, each blacked-out world another unanswered question. "We've ruled out the Joyrics," said Tessavgo, now head of the Compact's Intelligence Bureau. "They wouldn't strike so cleanly. No traces, no survivors. This is surgical." "And ancient," murmured the Lutheri envoy. "There are old machines in the Rim, forgotten weapons, sentinels of a lost war. Some things should not be awakened." But they had been. A lone transport stumbled back from one of the lost colonies, half the crew dead from radiation burns, the rest babbling in terror. Before the ship self-destructed under emergency protocols, its AI managed to beam one final image to Epsilon 9. A starship, not Joyrics, not Krillnar, not even Eldar in origin. Vast, jagged, blackened like a carcass of metal and flame, carved into its hull in an untranslatable code. A spiral of teeth and eyes. The humans had named many threats, but this was something else entirely. The archivists of the Eldar, reluctantly, came forward with an ancient name. The Vorax. Long before the core sectors were settled, before Earth's sun had even formed, the Vorax had ruled the void beyond the Rim. Not a species in the traditional sense. Some called them hive intelligences, others viral minds made of nanonital and void light. But whatever they were, they had scored entire galaxies. Then, without warning, they had vanished, locked away, buried by their own creators, or perhaps sealed off by the collapse of the galactic barriers at the Rim. Now something had woken them, and they were coming. Panic erupted across the Compact's outlying systems. Refugees streamed inward. Core fleets deployed to buffer worlds. The Lutheri reinforced orbital shields around key planets, and on Epsilon 9, the heartbeat of the Compact, every forge, lab, and barracks roared into life. This would not be a war of territory. It would be a war of survival. Fletcher knew this wasn't like the Krillnar or the Xerics. The Vorax didn't conquer. They consumed. There was no negotiation, no warning, just the flickering out of stars. But she also knew this. If Epsilon 9 had taught the galaxy anything, it was that humanity did not break. Not when mocked. Not when attacked. Not even when outnumbered by 1,000,000,000. We hold the line, she told the Council. If they want to consume the galaxy, they start with us. And when they do, they'll find more than flesh and steel. They'll find fire. New weapons were built, powered by combined tech, human adaptability, core power cores, Nimeri stealth tech, Lothari crystal logic, experimental fighters, AI-piloted strike drones, void-piercing orbital cannons. The first test came at Vega's grave, a long-dead world chosen as a forward defense station. The Vorax came in silence, their ships ghosting through space like predators. But the compact was ready. The trap was sprung, the fire lit. And as the void screamed, the first blow of the next great war was struck, not by an empire, not by an ancient race, but by the colony that had once been a punchline. Epsilon 9 stood ready. And the galaxy held its breath. The battle at Vega's grave had been brutal. Half the orbital array was lost in the first hour. Compact fighters vanished into the darkness as the Vorax swept through space like a living storm. But something miraculous happened. The line held. The Vorax, for all their terrifying power, had never encountered resistance like this before. The humans and their allies didn't fight like the old empires. They adapted mid-combat, rewrote code on the fly, sacrificed ships to deliver last-second payloads. They fought like cornered wolves, unpredictable, ferocious, and entirely unconcerned with how wars were supposed to be fought. By the end of the second day, the Vorax were retreating. It was the first time in known history they had ever been forced to. Back on Epsilon 9, celebrations were brief. Fletcher knew better than to claim victory. The Vorax weren't defeated, only delayed. The cost had been enormous. Thousands dead, ships in ruins, resources strained to the brink. And yet, even in the morning, something had shifted. Hope. The message spread like wildfire through the galactic net. The compact stood against the darkness, and the darkness blinked. More systems requested entry into the compact. Worlds once aligned with the Eldar, the Xerics, and other fading powers now looked to Epsilon 9 for leadership. Old loyalties dissolved. New banners were raised. Every embassy in the galaxy sent envoys. Even Earth's unified council, once distant and passive, officially moved their secondary command structure to the colony-turned-capital. The laughter was gone now. No one called Epsilon 9 a joke anymore. The world that had been mocked for its storms and failures now shone like a beacon at the heart of a rising empire, but not one of conquest. This was something different. Fletcher stood before the assembly, now housed in the newly completed Unity Spire, a structure woven from steel, crystal, and living root. Representatives from dozens of species filled the chamber. Screens buzzed with live transmissions from systems across the compact. The galaxy was watching. "The Vorax are not the end," she said, voice steady. "They are the test. We were never meant to be a footnote in someone else's history. Humanity wasn't supposed to survive the Krillnar. We weren't supposed to outwit the Xerics. We weren't supposed to lead anything." She stepped forward. And yet, here we are. The chamber was silent. Then, slowly, others rose. Vectal, the Core's Strike Lord, the Lothari Technomancer, her crystal eyes glowing, the feline Nimeri delegate, claws tapping with approval. One by one, species once foreign, once hostile, now stood together under a single idea. Not dominance, not obedience, but unity. Outside the Unity Spire, the first new fleet of the compact launched from orbit. Designed in shared laboratories, piloted by multi-species crews, powered by technologies that had once been impossible, now forged together by necessity and imagination. A new banner unfurled from the highest tower, the symbol of the compact, fractured no more. Whole, alive, burning with purpose. Fletcher watched the stars from the observation deck, her hand resting on the railing. She didn't smile. Not yet. There were still wars to fight. The Vorax would return. Other powers would rise, jealous of what had been built. But now, the galaxy had an answer to all of them. They had called it a colony, a mistake, a forgotten outpost in the dirt and storms. Now, Epsilon 9 was the capital of the most dangerous idea the galaxy had ever seen. A future not ruled by tradition or fear, but forged by resilience, innovation, and defiance. Not an empire of one. An empire of everyone who dared to believe in more. And they would fight for it. Together.